welcome to Yesteryear Untold, and we're here to talk about history things, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
we
that's
are.
what we're here for. Some history stuff.
We're the lovers of history.
Yeah, we have a love for history. I don't know if I would ever classify myself. I can't speak for you, but as a expert in history by any means. So I want to set
Yeah,
that tone off the gate. Like,
me too.
I'm not an expert in history,
Yes,
so
I'm not an
I'm
expert in history. But we enjoy it, so that's why we're here.
Yeah, so these are our thoughts and opinions and
Mm-hmm.
somewhat facts of Google research that we've done to
Mm-hmm.
become these big time experts of all things history and to share it in a podcast form. And I
Mm-hmm.
think by the end of this episode, we're going to share with everyone what the whole point of this
Mm-hmm.
series is, this whole entire podcast is. But in order to do that, we have to kind of look back at history, and one of the things that I realized is you have prehistory and then you have
Mm-hmm.
history.
Mm-hmm.
So, in talking about prehistory, that's literally just everything before written records of history.
Exactly.
So,
I wrote definitions down for each. I
see,
can
look at you.
share. I can share. I can share. Prehistory is the span of time before recorded history, ending with writing systems. So exactly what you stated.
No, not really exactly. It sounded much better.
But what? So there was prehistory and then the proto-history, correct?
Yes, that sounds
Yes,
great. I like that term, proto history. I just
I
call
do
it
too.
history. But yeah, it's whenever we just started writing it. And
Yeah.
literally, it's not what we know of as far as written down, it's what we found is to be
Yes.
more important, what we found. So it could be
Yeah.
well before that there was some kind of written communication
Mhm.
that we just haven't found, we don't know about, or we're not smart enough to figure out yet, and it could be stuff that we've seen and we just hadn't put it together yet. So
Or disintegrated, like it's just gone,
yeah,
vanished, and we never found. No one will ever know.
yeah, it could have been on
Mhm.
portable things like leaves and things like that. I mean, like, who knows what they used
Yeah,
back then, but
we
it's
use digital recordings now for history, so I get it.
we do.
Yeah.
We do. It's kind of exciting. I mean, I love history. I'm a nerd in that sense, and I love going places that are historic. And in the U.S., it's kind of insane when you go to Europe and places like that, or even in the Middle East, and you
Mhm.
talk about history. It's completely different than here, where it's only like 200 years old or 250 years old, and we're like, oh wow, that's so old, kind of a thing. But I love history, and I love going back and looking at and figuring out, what did people do? Like, what was happening in this world? It's amazing to think that hundreds of thousands of years ago, people were figuring out ways to communicate. They were figuring out ways to interact and possibly create societies and things like
Mhm.
that. And here we are, fast forward, into the year 2000 AD, and we are on the same struggle bus that they've been on all that time before. Like, some things just don't change, in my opinion.
Mhm.
We have technology, but as
Mhm.
people, have we really grown? I mean, maybe we'll figure that out in this podcast as we
We
continue
may,
on.
but a lot of what I Google research seems to be on the same wavelength.
And let's
That's
be
okay.
honest.
That's okay.
Let's be honest. Google research. So basically, everything we're sharing is
Yeah.
everything that is obtainable to us, like whatever's allowed out there for us to read and research. So we'll get into the fallacies of all of that, but it's kind of interesting, and that's why I wanted to state, like, we're not experts. We're not saying this is
Yeah.
the end all be all. We're not even saying maybe this is not true, but this is just
Mhm.
us talking about it and having a conversation. I guess we should introduce ourselves. I'm Jeff,
Yeah.
by the way,
And I'm Erin,
and we just like history.
and we're family.
Yeah, we are. We
Yeah,
are. We're family.
we
And
are family.
all right, we can break that down real quick if you want. We can totally switch the show up now, make it about music. So, historians believe that humans have been around for 200 to 300,000 years. I found that on my Google search. You might have found different years, and honestly, some things I searched, it may have found different. It
We can
depends
go
on
with
what people
it.
believe, if you believe
Mhm.
in certain religions, whatever. But if you look at that 200 to 300,000 years, we only have recorded history for 5,500 of those years. That's it.
Mhm.
5,500 of those years. So dating back to 3,400, 3,300
Yeah.
BC
Mhm.
is it. That's it. That's all the time frame that we have. And even then, do
Mhm.
we even really know what we think we've translated with all of these experts now, from the artifacts and things that we found? How do we even know this system is real?
Well, and I found this fascinating is that all the earliest civilizations all emerged independently of each other roughly around 3500 BC.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
weird.
I mean, it was the Sumerians, Mesopotamia, and then Egypt.
It
Like,
was.
yeah.
And
That's
then
what I found
Chinese,
fascinating.
and yeah, and the Chinese were right after that and right
Yeah.
around that time frame as well. And like
Hmm.
that's kind of weird. Like all of a sudden it just started like
Hmm.
out of nowhere. It was just like, oh, we got some written history down.
We want some
So
pictograms.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And who knew how to read that is what I'm saying. In modern day, who looked back and researched and passed that on to figure out what all that meant?
Well, I guess partly it's guessing, partly it's archaeology, anthropology. They're putting it together by, it's just like a pyramid. They're just keep
I see what you did there, the
building
pyramid.
it up.
So
Yeah, I
yeah,
did.
guessing is the one thing that I think I would
Hmm.
agree with. So to start off, before we even get into what this podcast is going to be about, we have to figure out where did history start, like we're talking about,
Hmm.
and what does it evolve to up to this point, and then we can kind of unveil what the whole premise of any of this is that we're doing.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about where history started. You brought up Mesopotamia, and
Hmm.
that's traditionally where everybody thinks it's started, or at least the records we found
Modern day
first.
Iraq.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's what
modern
they
day Iraq.
found. And they were the little pictures, the signs,
Yeah.
then it became characters,
Yeah.
that they found.
Hmm.
Um, they did it with wet clay
Yes.
and
Clay
reed
tablets.
stylus. Yes.
Yes, they used reed, and then they drew pictograms on clay tablets, and they had thousands of them. I mean, and it's pretty fascinating that they found these things, created books, like they created fictional stories, and then put them down in pictograms.
So like
And
for entertainment purposes.
yeah, yeah, they did. Yeah, I'm sure that people probably picked them up, read them, and then what my thought too was who could read them? Like
Yeah.
what part of society was reading them? Because now, people go to college, they get their masters, they get their doctorates. So, what level of society were the folks that were actually reading the pictograms and who was not?
And what kind of mass distribution existed for people to be even to get it to read it?
That's true. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, who was really being educated? Was there even an
Yeah.
education at the time?
And typically what I saw in my, Google research that I've done and the degree I got on this, from that, what I
Hmm.
realized was it was typically part of the royal family. Someone in a
Yes.
royal family or some kind of kingdom, was
Hmm.
specifically close to that family who was the scribe and who was in control of most of all the written documents, which should tell you the first alarming thing
Hmm.
about history and how
Hmm.
biased it probably is. Truly.
Oh, truly. Yeah. Oh, I saw a meme the other day where it was like a white guy's face on the Sphinx. And it
Yeah.
was like, these are all American history books.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we learned. And we continue to learn
Yeah.
that. And literally wherever you live, you're learning something different anyway, based on where you live too.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the luxury, I guess, we have now of history, but it's not the truth per se. So the Mesopotamia time frame in that region of this history we're talking about, they created, and I can't say the word, I know you know it, the cuneiform, whatever this
Oh,
is.
canoeiform. Canoeiform.
Cuneiform.
Almost like a
Canoe.
canoe.
Okay,
Canoeiform.
cuneiform. So they invented this, and ironically, it lasted in through the Christian era in
It
75
did.
AD.
Yeah, I saw that too. And I mean, what I noted was that the Sumerian writing is considered a great milestone in the development of humanity's ability to not only create historical records, but also creating pieces of literature, poetic epics, and stories, as well as prayer and laws. So, and then it ended up going into ideograms, which those are symbols that were made to represent ideas. So all of this started to kind of flow together. Like they went from pictures to actual ideas to stories and almost like the first Bibles. I mean, because of prayer, they were
Yeah,
putting prayer down on tablets, whatever
yeah,
they were praying to at the time.
whatever their
It could
agenda
have been a
was.
donkey. Yeah. I mean,
And that's what I saw, that like they found the earliest ones that they found were focused on economic and administrative documents. And one of the ones they found was like wages for workers and
mhm,
laborers. They found like I don't know how to read it, so I couldn't really tell, and I didn't research it enough. But then
mhm.
as they started going into time with it, that's when they started seeing the essays and the hymns and the poetries and myths. and stories that you're talking
Mhm.
about that they were creating for
Mhm.
entertainment purposes. So it's funny to see. Not it's just ironic more than anything to see how basically their civilization is pretty much the same as we are now when you look at it that way. They used writing for purposes of
Mhm.
keeping track of things and entertainment.
So we
And
haven't changed that much.
no, not at
I
all.
mean, the media that we use, of course, and how
Yeah, the
we
fact that we're
yeah.
doing this now through
Mhm.
audio.
Mhm.
So that was the Mesopotamia people that were the first, and I say that hesitantly because that's all
Mhm.
we know. We're the first, but at the same time, we have Egypt,
Yes, and hieroglyphics.
right? So they're doing it differently.
Yeah, which a Greek for sacred carvings. Did you know this?
I
Hieroglyphics
didn't.
means Greek for sacred carvings, but it made sense. I mean, so I have you been to Egypt?
No, I have not.
I have been, and I've went into the pyramids. I've seen the Sphinx. I've walked around. Um, little
And you
known,
grabbed a slice of pizza right across the street,
and I grabbed a slice of pizza right across the
literally
street.
right across the street.
Literally right across the street. It's like built right up. But we won't say that to everybody. You can still get the right pictures, and it's like an epic view of the desert, like leading all behind it. But yeah, you can get a slice of pizza like right up on it. But I just thought that sacred carvings, I mean, again, it goes back to the characters of ancient Egyptian writing systems were invented in the pictorial script, and uh, who read them? Who could read them? The pharaoh,
Yeah,
nobility, and priests.
yeah.
Hmm.
That's where you're right, and that's the issue and struggle I have with all this as we continuously walk through the time frame of written history is that it's all kind of I would I it's hard to believe even in modern history that every element that you've read and that
Hmm.
you read in a book about history is true because there's someone's interpretation or opinion
Hmm.
that's brought onto that's writing that. And I
Totally.
know people that believe in the Bible would say differently, and it's the truth, and then all be all. But
Hmm.
that's a whole different podcast that we can start
Hmm.
on that side,
Hmm.
and we can maybe dive into that on an episode or two with it.
Yeah.
But one fact I found in the Egypt portion of this is that it was the Egyptian writing that an alphabet would first evolve. That's literally where that, not the alphabet we have now in English, but an
Hmm.
alphabet in general, where they
Hmm.
used characters and started matching it up to have meanings,
Hmm.
specifically for letters to put together. So that was interesting that you would think that far back, that existed in
They were
that kind of.
connecting that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And in
it
their
wasn't just
language.
random.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
guess, I mean, the another factor in this that we haven't even said is what they were writing it in. And that's because of the fact that they were the pictograms and the
Hmm.
ideograms and then now hieroglyphics. So it was a carving and then, yeah, connecting it to some form of
So
an alphabet.
I have, and feel free because I know you did a ton more research than I do because it's just the type of person you are and you're smarter and you like
Not
dive
at
into
all.
things. And I'm just over here like loosely
I
using
told you I was
things.
shit show Aaron because I couldn't get my
You
stuff
are.
straight. And it's in the middle of a pandemic, so I'm like
You got your
trying to
papers
get
over
it.
there. You got
Yeah,
your
but I
like.
ran out of black ink, so I had to do it in red. How horrible is
Well, at least you did
that?
all that research. Shit
Try.
show Aaron over there. Um, I brought up Mesoamerica and China origins of written history as well.
Okay.
And just quickly, the things that I saw with that were interesting. It was oracle bones for the Chinese origins.
I
So
saw.
they used
I didn't
animal
see that.
bones to carve their writings with that. And these were animals that they would sacrifice or
Mhm.
just animals that they just wanted to eat and then carve up their bones to pass messages along. But they used over 4,500 symbols back in that time frame,
Wow.
and many of which can be identified as ancestors of the Chinese characters that are still in use today.
No,
So
I'm
it's
kind of
when you,
not surprised by that, though. Yeah, it just
yeah.
evolved.
Well,
If
when
it's
I
a good
look at any
system,
kind of,
why break it?
it's true. Well, look at how English has been. So we continually break our language year
Yeah.
after year. But the Chinese, I wouldn't know because I look at their language and I'm completely confused. And like, you
Mhm.
have to have an art degree to be able to write, to just be to draw those characters and
Oh
to
yeah,
do
and
that. So
Russian too. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
yeah.
it's
So
a
we got
different.
it easy where we are. And so that's all I wanted to say on China. And then Mesoamerica really focused on deer skin. They painted on deer
Yes,
skin, tree bark, and
caves.
yeah, and they used something called
Hmm.
lime paste that they
Hmm.
would do. And this is where scribes really started becoming super important and a part of the
Hmm.
royalty at that time. And that area was southern Mexico to Costa
Hmm.
Rica region during that sense. So that's way back history records and recordings and things like that that we look at as the start of history. Again, I have issue with that because I feel like there's so much more to history before that, and the fact that we
Oh
can't
yeah.
read about it
Well,
doesn't
the
make it
prehistory, yeah,
right.
it's the prehistory side of it, and obviously the transitional period between the prehistory and proto-history is
Right.
like literacy. That's like the
Yeah.
main thing, is that when people actually start to read. So,
So when does history begin? That's what we're trying to figure out. And so you have the prehistoric time.
hmm
And so one of the things that I realized was what separates prehistoric times
hmm
and these modern history times is the fact that a story was created. There's a story. And that's
hmm
it. So prehistoric, there's really no story to tell about any of these people. There was no story that was written down or shared. And if there's no story, there's no history, is the best way
hmm
to look at it. And so that's where we get to this point where humankind started writing these things down. We found it. Now we have these stories to share. That's when history started. At least that's what I gathered in my, you know, little research that I've done on Google.
Well, I will say that when we're going back to the Sumerians, there was a story that was recorded, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it was a
Mhm.
lengthy poem of writing, and it was fictional, but it was laid out on several clay tablets. So, they did. I guess that's the one fictional that stood out and stood the test of time. But that's it. Yeah, you don't really hear, and they didn't. I didn't go into detail on what that epic was truly about. Um,
Well, and that's where I think this story, and whether it was myths, whether it was just anything they're writing down,
yeah.
I think that's really what it means is that there was something to share. There was something
hmm
that now is tangible that you can actually share, and that's why we call that
It
history at this
wasn't
point
just
in time.
entertainment, just historic fact.
Right, right. So, if this is a question I came up with when I was looking through this, if some groups of people, and this was after history started, technically, like we're talking about, if some groups of people and civilizations didn't have written history,
hmm
does that make their oral traditions false? Things that were passed on from generation to generation. And just because a civilization had written history, does it make it facts? That was the question I started running into. And we have this preconceived notion that just because it's written down, it's a fact. I mean, we see that on social media all the time
hmm
where people share articles that are bullshit that someone has created and written in their mom's basement and put it on some random site that they probably created, and it's shared. And then everybody's not even reading the article, but reading the
hmm
headline and saying, oh my God, I can't believe this happened, because
Well, and it can be
that's
like
what
our
we believe.
podcast. I mean, I was thinking that when I was writing this all down, because we just said we're not experts, but we researched, and what we found, we're now expressing on our yesteryear, podcast. So it's
Right.
like, yeah,
It's
I
the
mean,
same
it
thing.
really it is. Yeah, it is.
We're just bullshit. So stop listening right now, is what we're saying. Like, this is just
Well,
dumb. Don't
it's
waste your time.
entertainment, but I mean, it fuels our souls, obviously, because we enjoy researching, we enjoy learning from people's mistakes. That's why I like history, because I feel like we
Right.
shouldn't be repeating some of the things. So I guess the narrative that you learn is that we will, unfortunately, repeat so many things.
Right.
Yeah.
And we do. And we do. So that was the question that kept lingering in my mind. And I try to, I'll break it down as we get into this further, kind of what I
hmm
realized from it. That the oral tradition is a big problem with history and how it's been passed on before it finally gets written down.
hmm
And that's just the start and the stem of where you run into some of the issues of it being false or myth or things like that. But then there's a ton more with it. So, it gets filtered, through transcriptions,
hmm
and then secondary sources, will take it and rewrite it and do it in a different way. So it's an issue, and it's
hmm
something that I didn't really focus on until I started doing, this research for this specific episode, where I realized, like, holy shit, everything that I've probably been taught is not 100% correct.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's recorded history, like written history is recorded history. And I wrote down. because when we first talked about this idea, we wrote written history and when it became hard copy.
Right.
Like that was seriously, and it was something that's kind of sprung in my mind because we kept making that list. And so I looked up like the history of the field of history. I like my definitions. I hope this is okay.
Let's do it.
The tradition of recording past and current events goes back thousands of years and was one of the humankind's first fields of study. Study of history is one of the most valuable pursuits, which provides invaluable information and insights about who we are as a species. So I think that's why it is valued, even if we're not sure over generations that a fable turns into fact.
Right.
That could be many, 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 many things. I won't go into religion, but
exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, yes, I think a lot of the things that we learned firsthand, and I mean, you always go back to like World War II and Hitler, but like what people believed was false. And we didn't even know about it in the United States. But anyways, we'll go into that on another episode. But
and I think the problem is we believe what we want to believe. And
yeah, we do.
That's so even if we're reading something, you and I both could read the same thing and interpret it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the issue with religion, the issue with written history as well. Like it could be written exactly as the facts, but we would both interpret it whatever way that we want it to, based on our own environments and based on our own behavior up to that point and things that we've learned. We would still take it and run with it a little different and see a different side from it, which makes history fun in that sense, and and use it, but also can be dangerous at the same time to use historical fact to prove a point, to try to prove a point to other people, to get them to agree with you on something. So this is where I got to, and I'm going to let you take the lead with this one because you know how to pronounce the dude's name more than I do. And you have a piece of paper that has it sounded out.
I did like his story. And this is a great lead into why, as you said, we are doing this podcast. And I didn't even realize it until I think that's why I just kept like writing things down, and it's so vast because his whole story goes into why there's so many people that are untold figures, like hidden historical figures.
And that's something we haven't even shared up to this point. That's what we want to do with the show is share the history, share events, people, things that happen that aren't in the limelight of history books and popular history. So we want to share the things that happen and talk about them. But this first episode, what we want to do is break down what is history and is it even real, so that we get that out of the way, and then we can move on with these stories that we start telling of these cool people, or
some are heroes, some are scary. I mean, it's but they're all fascinating, that's for sure.
So the first, and this isn't really the premise of this first episode where we're focal point, but this first person we touch on. All right, so I'm gonna try to pronounce it. Let me see your cheat sheet real quick.
He was the father of history.
Yeah, the father of history.
That's a D.
Herodotus.
Herodotus.
Not Herodotus, but Herodotus.
Herodotus. Yep.
All right, we got it. Herodotus. An ancient Greek, as you said, known as the father of history. So tell me what you've learned about him, and I'm just going to chime in stuff that I saw that was very interesting about him as well.
Well, the one thing I wrote that it kind of tangents back to what we were discussing is, guess what? He's from an influential family.
Of course.
Yeah, his mom and dad were influential. He lived in now what is called modern day Turkey. He was a Greek, but he was a Persian subject. And this all kind of comes in together with the first history books that he wrote. And his important work was, and I found two names for this, and check me if I'm wrong, but The Histories and History. What did you see?
I saw Histories and The Histories.
Yeah.
I don't know. I put The Histories because I saw that more, I think. But
it was about a book. Yeah, it was a book about about like the Greco Persian Wars. And really they call it the Persian Wars. And the reason that what I got from it is the reason that he started to write this book was because he was a big traveler.
Okay.
And so he traveled to places like Egypt. So think about it. Like we've got like the Mediterranean Sea, and then you're thinking in 485 BC. So people aren't jumping on airplanes. They're canoeing, they're getting in larger boats now, but you have to be a little bit of a badass to want to get around, I think. So
Yeah.
he's going to Egypt, Macedonia. He goes north beyond the Danube. He says he goes to the Gardens of Babylon in modern day Iraq. He says
Interesting.
this. And this all had to have taken him many years, because you're not getting
Yeah.
anywhere. Anyways, because of these travels, they say is why history was born. And I quote that as the history, the book, but history was born because of these wars between the Greece and the Persians. Can I note, I did find his statue. He had a large beard, lots of hair on top. He had really hairy, massive nose. It's like exactly what I would expected the father of history to look like.
And it probably was not how he looked, honestly. It's how he wanted the people to think he looked.
Exactly. Yeah. But
You said Greco-Persian Wars, and there is this place in East Nashville called Greco that's one of the best Greek little places I went to, and it just made me think of it, and now I'm kind of hungry. So that's just a side note. Like when you said that, it's a cool little spot. Anyway, yes. So I read up on him too, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder.
No, keep going. No.
Because I know that you did a lot more research on him than I did. I just only have a couple bullet points, and it was mainstream things that I saw.
Mm-hmm.
But he wrote one time, I'm going to quote what they said. He said, I write these things as they seem true to me, for the stories told by the Greeks are various and, in my opinion, absurd. That's what he said. Yes. So he said that. So he basically said, I don't give a shit what y'all are talking about. That sounds ridiculous. I'm going to write what seems real to me. That's going to be the history of it. So this dude's admitting to that.
Yes, I saw this too. Yeah, I mean, he was criticized for like his obvious legends and fanciful accounts because but he was using that. Like he was using other people's historical accounts and fairy tales to place in his historical history book.
He basically was a great fictional writer.
But not all of it was fiction. I mean, and see, it goes back to what we were talking about. But I mean, that's I don't know. I mean, so histories is about like the Persian Wars, and I looked a little bit more into the conflict. So Persia was enormous. Like the Persian Empire was huge, it was vast. It went all the way to Pakistan, and then all the way over to like Italy.
Yeah, I watched 300. I watched that movie. So.
Yeah, I did too, a long time ago. And then the Greeks were political. They were like the hipsters of the day, Mm-hmm. So, and then the Persians struggled to control. So, they were fighting. They through these conflicts, they actually took a lot of their land. That's why it goes back to our main man, father of history. Herodotus was that Persian subject. So the Persians struggled to control him. So they appointed all these tyrants to rule over each of the cities. And it did not pan out very well for any of them. Like there were a lot of issues. And he lived in one of those towns. So I do think that one, I read, that's part of the reason he wanted to travel. But then the second thing I read about him was he possibly wanted to travel because he wanted to get away from his lies. People didn't like him. Yeah. Yes. It like doubled back.
He was an asshole. And people were like, I think he walked around like, hey, I'm going to write some cool shit and the ladies are going to follow me around and I'm going to travel all over the place. And I'm going to be this cool, like hipster dude that rolls around doing all this cool, edgy stuff. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be the father of history. Like he probably claimed that himself at that time and said that he was, but then he became known as the father of lies. Instead of the father of history. That's what he became called.
His work is like considered folksy. That's what they said. Like his predecessors, one modern scholar states and describes a curious false start to history.
So he was just an asshole. Like that's how I read into it. Like he may have had some stuff in there that was real or not. It was biased. It was based on other people's stories. And then he specifically said himself, I write it as it seems true to me. So his opinion is the most important. That's all that matters. And when you think about it, that's literally how history is forced down our throat.
Yeah, you just said the quote at the end, like he was a historian and teller of tales. For Herodotus, then, it takes both myth and history to produce truthful understanding.
Yeah.
It's like what you were saying.
Yeah, I clearly didn't say that. That sounded better,
No,
but
but it's exactly what you were. I mean, I just paraphrased that, but I mean, but again, he's the father of comparative anthropology. Like he has
yeah,
all of these great names that follow along.
he
So that's
does.
why we're talking about him.
But everybody hated him during his
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
they did. They literally like just stay away from that guy. Like he's a piece of shit. Like they would just
Yeah.
make fun of his mom. Like they just threw a bunch of stuff out there. Like
Dude, on the guy's gravestone, it says Herodotus, the son of Sphinx, lies in Ionic history without peer, a Dorian born who fled from Slander's brand and made in Thuria his new native land. Like,
wow,
that was on a
wow.
tombstone of his.
So they hated him that much.
They really did. Yeah. So
I
that is
mean,
like,
I got to give the guy props though because he probably did go around as like a superstar. Like he's like
Mhm,
a David Copperfield kind of guy, like just going around doing some cool stuff and like kind of
mhm,
just making people feel like he's this person that he's not. And I won't get into politics, but we have a lot of
mhm,
politicians who are good at
mhm,
that. So he's,
mhm,
kind of has that great quality about him.
mhm.
So I don't have anything more on him specifically, and I'm scared to say his name again because I already forgot. But if you do, I want to hear more because I was intrigued. And, okay, Herodotus.
Yep, there you go.
All right, Herodotus. As I look at your paper, so just so people listening know, like Aaron and I didn't share really anything that we were going to
Mhm,
talk about together before, and I find it interesting that we both found him in the
mhm,
process of figuring this out, and we both obviously saw the same stuff. Now, granted, we're using the same Google. I mean, I might have
mhm,
used AOL or Bing or Yahoo, but we use the same search mechanism to find. But the fact that that's what stood out to you and I separately
mhm,
was this guy and like his importance to history, but almost in such a bad way,
mhm.
not in a positive, good way.
Yeah.
So it made me come up with that question: is history true, or is
Mhm,
it legend? Is that
mhm,
really what it is? Which brought up the bigger question of our podcast: why, why does certain history become
mhm,
popular and become pushed and produced over and over again and forced down, every child, especially in American culture through our textbooks and everything like that. Yet everything else that's important or was important during that time is left out. Why are these people left and these events left by the wayside during this? And so, in order for me to understand it more, I went in further with the problems with history. So, we've talked about a lot of them already.
mhm,
One problem that I realized was you don't need to be qualified or a practicing historian to think, talk, or write about the past or talk about it on a podcast like we are right now. So you do not have to be qualified in order to participate in some kind of measure of history, whether it's thinking, talking, or
mm.
writing about it and sharing information about it. So
And that's
anyone that
why
has,
we
yeah,
have QA. That's why we have QA non. Now we just
yes.
lost a lot of listeners, but
We did. But we
sorry,
totally.
but
I'm
it's
not
false. It's
sorry. I'm
false.
not
It's
sorry for
false.
that. Not talk about. I actually have a point about conspiracies a little bit later, actually, and it is why we have that
Yeah,
because people can create whatever they want.
yeah.
If you have any interest in history, if you can read or study or
Mhm,
discuss it in some way, immediately you're an expert
mhm,
at it.
mhm.
Just like us on this podcast right now,
And if
which
you're
is
great
proving
at
our point.
and if you're great at talking about it, then people will listen. I thought that same thing when I was driving home today from work. Like I thought that I was like, me and Jeff really aren't experts at all, but we just find it fun and we find it interesting. So that's why we're doing this.
Yeah. It is fun because I love it, and history is one of the top podcasts out there as far as themes go. So I know we're competing with a lot of people, and I'm sure people are much
Mhm.
better and much more qualified. We're better looking. That's more important when you're
They
listening
can't see
right
us, though.
now.
They can't see us.
I know we have a face for radio, as they used to tell me. Another point I found. So there was a guy named, I don't know why I pretend like I know these guys' names and how to pronounce them. Johann Huizinga. All right, let's just say
Uh-huh.
that's it. I'm sorry, Johann, man, if you're listening right now from somewhere, wherever you are in this world. He was imprisoned by the Nazis and he
Mm,
died in one of the camps. But he said, no other discipline has its portals so wide open to the general public. Basically, it is wide open that anybody can write anything they want, produce anything they want with history. And I thought it was interesting that
mm,
someone who was at a concentration camp and who died in that I would make a statement like that, which made me start wondering and questioning really,
mhm,
even from that element of the Nazis, what has been changed and shifted, and and what is made to look better almost, or what is that from the truths and the realities of what these people went through. But I found that interesting. Just it was true. It was a true statement. That's why I put it on this list. Is that literally any of us, just like we said, any of us can produce history and talk about it and make it real. If we believe it, if we are charismatic enough, and we can get a little following with it. Now it's become a cult, like then it's like it's a real thing at this point, or you can call it, the truth if you want to.
Well, I mean, and you don't even have to call out anything, but I mean, talking heads, that's what we're doing right now. But I mean, people just get wide coverage on these national cable news or whatever you watch or listen to. But yeah, they're just talking heads.
Well, and that goes to where we are with the realm of popular history. So we're anti-popular history with this podcast is the best way to put it, I think. So
yeah, I think so too.
We don't want to tell you everything We don't. Like, you already heard that. You believe what you want to believe. So I think the reason that popular history is kind of ridiculous is it's simplified. Like, it's literally watered down so that we understand it. It's cherry picked by far, like just going in and picking what best stories that sound good and completely distort it, almost to the point of corruption, and I won't say all history is that way and all popular history. And so I started thinking, what are the reasons behind this? And so I wrote a few down here. It goes back to something we talked earlier, and please chime in at all, because I'm tired of hearing my own voice. But most people tend to value story over analysis. They want to hear a story, and that's what we talked about earlier.
That's why people like to watch movies and not read books.
Yes.
I mean, Gone with the Wind, the book is so much better than the movie, and the movie is epic, but the story, the book is so much better.
Yeah. The story.
And so different. It's actually very different. Yeah. She has another child. Yeah. There's so many different things. And so I think that's your quote.
Yeah, that's one reason why popular history exists. Another one is people like clear and simple explanations. Just want it, like we said, watered down, straight to the point. Yeah. Also, people like to assign responsibility, liability, and blame. And so if there's stories in history where we can do that, we love that. So the Nazis, we love that. We love talking about that, how we can assign blame and we can look at that and pinpoint that. The couple other thing is we like moral heroes.
Sure. You always hear about
culprits. We love those villains as well at the same time in history. We love satisfying endings. That's why movies always end that way. And we also like to think that our own nations and societies to be more advanced, civilized, or culturally superior than others. And that is what distorts popular history. And why I said earlier, you could learn something in the US and learn somewhere in South Africa, learn the same thing, and it would be completely different in how you learned it. And
I think that's happening right now in 2020 with like Black Lives Matter. Yeah, in the US and like African American history and how we're learning about like Juneteenth and Tulsa. It's all of these things.
Well, growing up in the South and learning in the South is completely different than people learn in the West Coast or in the Midwest or the Northeast. And the things that we're taught, like Virginia history. You and I both learned Virginia history coming into school. And no one else is really being taught that outside of Virginia history, except for when you talk about, the main events, Colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown and things like that were important to the nation. But even all of that, like, I remember thinking about the Pocahontas story, and I'm going off on a tangent here, but I was thinking about the Pocahontas story, and I did a whole ancestry thing, and supposedly she's my ancestor of some sort, which so many people say. So I don't feel special by any means. And it's
23 and me.
I know. So it's probably all a lie. But with that being said, that story, which you can learn it different ways. You can learn it through the textbook. You can watch the movies that were made that had nothing to do really with it. Yep. None of it ever really made sense to me. It didn't make sense to me that she fell in love with one person, but ended up going back to England with another, having a baby and then dying shortly after. And like, none of that story seemed right. Like, there's so much missing to it. As we're terrorizing her tribe and her family and taking over their land, she's just over like, I'm just so in love. And like, I don't know. So even the simple things like Pocahontas, probably one of the most famous characters. Everybody's recognizes her name, and I say characters, I really
Mm-hmm.
do, instead of historical figures.
Mm-hmm.
Something's just not right about it. But anyway, that's a completely different tangent. So
There's so
uh,
many characters like that. Like the one that pops up right in my head is Marilyn Monroe.
yeah,
Nobody
yeah,
really knows who she is. And then there's stories created about her in Hollywood now with top
yeah.
actresses playing her. And they're trying to say this is like a diary she wrote. And you will never know,
That's
like,
I think that's the point. So every episode we get in, you never know. But we're going to tell
mhm,
you what we learned and what we think
mhm.
based on our own biases and what we what we saw. So I so some other things that I found, and please chime in with any of this, that are major issues with history and proving the point of why certain history is chosen over others. So number one, in history, we have a lot of generalizations. So
Yes, we do.
we draw conclusions from just a few facts, just like we're doing with this podcast. We pulled a
Hmm.
few facts. We
Hmm.
already have a
It's
generalization of,
easy. Yeah.
yeah, of Harambe or whatever the guy's name was. We have a generalization of him.
Hmm.
What is the guy's name?
Herodotus.
Yeah.
Herodotus.
We have a generalization already just from a few
Yeah.
facts that we read from a little bit of research we did. So
Hmm.
we summarized entire civilizations and
Yeah.
events based on those few facts. That's what we do.
In like 20 minutes.
Yeah. We're like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That's the Sumerians. They did this and that was cool. Like
Yep.
they had grandchildren, great grandchildren. I mean, just,
Yeah.
it was insane, but that's what we do.
Hmm.
Conspiracy theories. Another way that we pick certain history over others is with conspiracy theories. They're super popular.
Hmm.
Kennedy assassination, moon
I
landing,
love them. I love them.
9/11, deep
Yeah.
state, which you brought up, even like
Hmm.
those things are popular and become part of the mold of history at some point if they
Hmm.
become popular enough.
Hmm.
We start talking about like, yeah, I did see that the moon landing, they did record that in Hollywood, like people
Hmm.
start talking about it like it's fact, like the flat earthers, which we now lost some other listeners, but
Oh,
that's
well.
I
Bye.
know. That's the other part of it, that it's really it corrupts history,
Hmm.
and that's why certain things shine over others. um Another factor, myth and mythology. We most of the time, history, from what I see and what I gather, is created to fit a particular narrative. So popular history is filled with myths or stories that are
Hmm.
unsupported by evidence and sometimes can be just blatantly untrue, but they become popular. So example, I'm going to give an example. Paul Revere. And we're
Oh,
going
yeah.
to, some episode, I want to dive into other people around Paul Revere
Or
that we haven't
the
really.
female
Yes,
American, like,
yes,
yes,
yes.
who
So
did the
Paul Revere's.
same damn thing that he did.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. So
I didn't even
Paul,
know that, so I was researching.
I know, and I think I put her on that list. But Paul
Yep.
Revere, so he did his little midnight ride
Hmm.
up in Massachusetts to warn of the
Hmm.
British troops. We all know
Yep.
it.
Yep.
So our understanding of the entire incident of Paul Revere is based off an 1860 poem by a dude named Wadsworth Longfellow, and it's called Paul Revere's Ride.
Yep.
The poem is full of made up facts and inaccuracies. Literally, this guy just made a poem because he wanted to make a poem
Wow.
to like literally get in bed with the girl next door, and he's like, cool, I write poems now, check it out, like check this out, I'm gonna serenade you
Wow.
now for now. And that's what we literally use as history now of Paul Revere, of everything that we learn. So everything from that poem has exaggerated his importance
Yeah, it
in
has.
our history. So he's
Hmm.
a recognized name now. Like there's stuff named after him.
Oh,
People, oh
yeah.
yeah, Paul
People
Revere,
dress up
man.
as Halloween as him
Yeah,
for Halloween. Paul Revere,
Paul
the little
Revere.
boys. Yeah.
So mythology is an issue. That's been an issue. That's what creates popular history.
Hmm.
Um, Nationalism. I spoke on that a little bit earlier,
Hmm.
but the attachment to your own country, that's
Hmm.
where history books really get, diluted and changed and distorted. It's taught differently, like we said, in different countries and in different parts of the US and different
Hmm.
states. Like it's completely taught different. So we get that. At the end of the day, we just want to look like the good guys and the heroes. That's what we want to do in our history, always. Whether it's the truth or not, we want to do that. So it
Hmm.
distorts it, but those are the popular elements. Anything that can make us look like the heroes, we're all about it. That's what we want to teach. That's what we learn. Then nostalgia is an element of it.
Yeah, sure.
So There's, people, it's almost like a good old day kind of
Well, I
mindset.
mean, that's like keep America great. Keep America
Yes,
great again.
yes,
That's
he's playing on
nostalgia.
that. He
Yeah,
is playing on
sure.
that. And now we probably lose another set of listeners, which I'm okay with.
No,
But
I mean, no, but I'm not even saying anything against the administration. I'm just saying that the logo is based
yeah,
off nostalgia.
the marketing
Yeah.
scheme behind it
Hmm.
is based off nostalgia. The good
Hmm.
old days. We
Yeah.
glorify the past. We
Hmm.
always glorify it. When someone dies, think about Kurt Cobain. When he dies, he is immediately glorified as this
Hmm.
amazing person. You could have someone that abuses their wife and then they get murdered tragically. You're going to remember how they got murdered, and then you're going to glorify them. Up in that, oh,
Hmm.
they died too soon. They had kids. They had a family. They had, that I see that all the time, and not all the time, I mean several times I've seen it.
Hmm.
But I have an example of this with this movie that I love. Probably my most favorite movie is Midnight in Paris.
Hmm.
And in this movie, Owen Wilson, it's a Woody Allen film. Owen Wilson's in Paris, and I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I have. Yep.
Okay,
A few years back.
so I'll share with anybody who's listening to haven't. He
Yep.
goes to Paris. He's a modern day writer, and he's fascinated with the 1920s, which kind of I'm the same way. I love the
Hmm.
1920s. I'm
Hmm. Me too.
completely nostalgic with that. So he at midnight one night he's walking, and actually in Paris I went and found these steps at midnight just because I was so curious in real life. Like I know it was a movie, but I went to these steps at midnight, these
That's
same steps to see if
cool.
something cool would happen, and it didn't for me. Instead, I had someone follow me back to my hotel. It was kind of creepy, but um, so he's there on the steps, and this horse and buggy comes up, and or this carriage or whatever comes, and he gets in the car with him, and he goes back to the 1920s, and he's with all the famous writers and painters and everybody of that era that we know. And he meets a woman during that time, and she's fascinated with the 1890s, and then they go back to the 1890s, and then the people in the 1890s are fascinated with the 1860s, and it's on, so on and so on. And there's a word for it, but I can't remember what that is, and at some point maybe it'll come to me. But there's a word for that, where we really are stuck on the past. We
Hmm.
share what we think was the best time, and we want to continue to get back to that time. And I even do it as an old man now with music. Like, the music was just so much better in the 90s. Like it just was. It's just garbage
Hmm.
now. So that's a big piece of what makes certain elements of history
Hmm.
popular and plays on us, really um, appreciating certain elements of it based on that nostalgia. And the last element, because then I'll shut up about all of it. But the last element that I
Hmm.
saw that I think is the biggest piece of distorting history and why only certain elements are popular is Eurocentrism. And that to me has done it for almost everything that I've ever read or I know, at least
Hmm.
in the Western, US or the Western part of the world. Everything is looked at purely from a European point of view. That's what has happened to history in our books and
Well,
everything.
do you think it's part of the reason that we found old homeboy, Father History, Herodot- Herodotus? I
With
mean,
some
truly,
kind of
because he was
doctor.
like under the European
Yes.
branch. And then there
Yes.
was the Chinese. I mean, of course, you're looking at like years too,
Yeah.
like when they're writing stuff. But why was there this self importance? And maybe it's something that's already in our heads that we just zoom in on that. I mean, maybe not, but
Probably.
he is placed there like on the top of the Christmas tree, like boom, father of history. And then we see that
Exactly.
he's lying. So Eurocentrism is there. I
Well,
think it
and
is.
it is. I think it's destroyed so much of history. I mean, they've legitimately, and this is stuff that I'm reading that
Hmm.
who knows what's real, who's not again, but have denied European histories, European people who created the books, text, everything that was passed along, denied non-European people their own voice.
Hmm.
Like that's literally what they did. So, for example, there were complete moments in history that have been deleted that are being shared. Now, is this true? Is it not? Again, I'm not going to say one way or the other. I'm just sharing what I've read and what I
Hmm.
think. Chinese scientific discoveries and inventions, Islamic mathematics, things from way
Hmm.
back in history that were already done and already a part of the process were deleted so that the Europeans could be the first at these elements, and they create their own history based on it. So they've done an amazing job, and I don't know who they are. We, is the best way to put it, have done an amazing job of separating civilizations with barbaric savages. There's always a good and an evil. And so we look at even Native Americans in this country, because they didn't necessarily have written history, we look at them as barbaric savages because
Mm.
they didn't have written history. They didn't have a real civilization in our thought process, which was, transportation and, some kind of kingdom and some of this and
Mm.
that. But they had all of that element. They had their own tribes. They had their own system of working. And
It was just a different way of thinking.
yeah. And
Mhm.
because it's Eurocentrism
Mhm.
came in, we look at them completely different. And I do agree. One thing I'll say is in history that I've learned, I do remember talking about how awful Europeans were to Native Americans when we came here. That
Yeah.
wasn't a hidden fact. So I don't know how that got passed along and finally approved to be in the textbooks, but I imagine it's a ton worse than what we learned about and what we did to massacre everyone, to take their land, literally steal their land,
Mhm.
say, hey, it's ours now. Like, this is what we do, come at us. That's what Europeans did in their conquests and their journey, everything during that time. They
And
just
they did
wanted.
it to each other in Europe as well.
Yes.
I mean, but I mean, I also start to look at like world history, and you see that all cultures do all of this to each other. Like every nation has
Yeah, it's true.
despicable
It's true.
history. Like you could look back in China, and you can look back in Russia, and you could just talk about all the different dynasties and ways that people fought. But
So what
yeah.
did you learn today, like from this, that like you walked away and you were like, man, like I didn't know that, or I want to research that more, or I'll
Oh
start.
well,
Or
yeah,
let
yeah.
you
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, for me, it was the fact that I look at history differently now, almost as it's just a pile of bullshit. Like, I second guess
Truly.
everything that I see now and read. Yes, that's kind of what I got from this. Now, I may be saying that kind of funny, like, but I'm having a hard time believing that everything that we read and learn in the process is real, and is when I shared a lot of those different things, nostalgia and some of those elements,
Hmm.
everything that I feel like I've learned has been influenced in some way for it to be shared with me in this very condensed down version that.
Well, I have a question to ask you though. So I know that you've traveled and you've seen things. So when you think about like actually going to a historic monument or
Mhm.
something that was created, I'm going to go back to like the pyramids because we were discussing it. But when I saw that, I instantly went back to like fourth and fifth grade because you're learning it, but you're seeing it in front of you. So even though maybe the hieroglyphics might be a bit false and they may be leading us into something that wasn't really their life, there was also, like you said, life around it because there were workers that built the pyramid. And then we were studying how they did it. Like, how did they build these big
Right.
blocks? How in the world did they do that? So I think that those historic facts, you're putting it together. And that's what I find fascinating about history is that there are like there are people that that study it, and you figure out like why we are here today, why
Yes.
we're able to build the Eiffel Tower or the Washington Monument, or like I think about it like that. And then I also just think people are really interesting. I like people. I like listening to people. So good or bad, they're fascinating. And
Well,
that's why I'm
and
excited to do this.
yeah, and I agree. I agree with that sentiment. Like, I believe in order to know where we are going, we have to know where we came from. That cliche statement, and
Hmm.
that is to look back as people in history and see what we've done, how we've evolved. Um, just I that's the part of history that I enjoy, and it's fascinating to me more than anything. I'm a person that's big on nostalgia
Hmm.
of things that I don't even know or never experienced before. I believe in reincarnation, so I feel like I've
Hmm.
experienced those moments before in some way, and
Hmm.
that's why I'm connected to it. Was I a part of this event in history or not? Who knows? Like, but I think it's fascinating to figure out where we came from, because it's very self-centered to sit around and just think about our current time as the only time on this planet, and we get lost in that in our daily
Hmm.
struggles. And
I
I
agree.
you and I both, I think, text this the other day, like, it really makes you feel small and
Hmm.
realize how small you are in this world, in this place, in your daily struggles, how small they are in comparison to the overall, fact that we've been around for hundreds of thousands of years and will continue to exist.
Hmm.
And and keep moving forward. And to me, that makes me feel better, actually, that I'm
Mhm.
so insignificant, that it doesn't matter if I mess up or make mistakes
Mhm.
along the way or things like that. So that's what it
Mhm.
does for me. That's kind of relieving, so to speak.
Well, and I mean, when I was just going over this, I just find that like the methods of recording history, and I wrote it down, was that we began with writing, and then now it's photography and audio recordings and digital recordings and
Hmm.
the internet, like we're taking copies of web pages. And so I just find, and I have always found, that history is that narrative that, even if it may be false, um, I don't know, it's just very important to go back and reread and continue to go back to those stories, because future generations and anyone from the past, we learn from. And
Yeah,
there's value in that. There's not a lot of value in a lot of things in this world, it doesn't seem like, and there's value in this.
it's for sure, because we live in the moment, and and I don't mean that in a good way. I just posted the other day about how it is good to live in the moment, but we live in the
Yeah.
moment of now and instant gratification and satisfaction and things like that. And we
Hmm.
have a hard time trying to figure out who we were and where we came from. And so for me, it's exciting to do this episode because it gets rid of all of the fallacies and everything related to history. We can get it out of the way, for anybody that's like questioning anything that we bring up in the future, on other episodes moving forward. But it now allows us to dive into the exciting things that this podcast is going to bring to the table. And that's the untold people and events in history. And to me, that's exciting. It's things I'm
Hmm.
going to learn, which is why I want to do this. I'm going to learn about these people. It's going to be interesting facts. It's going to be, or I say that in quotes, but interesting things
Hmm.
that we learn about
Yeah.
them.
Hmm.
So I'm
And
excited
people
about
that
that.
we didn't know, and people that I mean, we wrote down such a list. I mean, there's so many people that I've never even heard of, and we found, and that have done great things and horrible things. And I hope
Well,
that you enjoy it. I hope that whoever listens to this is really going to love hearing these facts as well, and you take something from it.
Well,
Um,
and I've had people, and you've had people reach out to you already, like, "Hey, this
mhm,
is an interesting thing to talk on, or to figure out, or to learn more about and share." I've had like 4 of those in the last week since I've talked to people about
mhm,
doing this podcast. So they're everywhere. It's hidden. It's like history hidden around us that we're going
mhm,
to expose and talk about. And some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be really bad, and some of it's going to be
mhm,
funny, like
mhm.
whatever. But it's going to be endless. We'll probably have about 500 episodes when it's
Oh
all
my
said and
god,
done.
there's gonna be so many. I mean, yeah, the New York Times article, it was an obit. It was an obituary, like,
Yeah, exactly. And
but
Megan was just telling me about one literally right before this started that's super interesting that I want to dive into at some point too. So there's a ton of it. I'm
yeah,
excited. Now we had to
I'm
start
excited
with
too.
what is the history of history? That's what we had to
Yep.
start with. And
Yeah.
before we can move on to that. So I got nothing more to say. Like I said, I'm tired of hearing my voice, and probably so is everybody else. So I don't know what else you have to add or say. And I know I talked a lot, so I'm gonna shut up.
No, 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 no. I'm just looking forward to doing this with you, Jeff. And I hope that everybody else enjoys this as well along our journey of finding out untold historic
Yesteryears.
facts. Facts,
Yes.
yesteryears. I put my quotations up.
With
But
the facts, because they can see
this is
that.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, I'm excited. So we're moving on, and thanks to anybody that listened to this one. And
Hmm.
next week we
Thank you.
dive into our first person or event, which will be a shock. And I will say quickly, if you follow us on Instagram at
Hmm.
Yesteryear Untold, by all means DM us some ideas and people that
Yeah.
that you want us to research. Like, we'll build a big list, and week to week we'll be happy to share some that we're thinking about doing next week, and maybe people can vote who we do
Mhm.
the following week. So whatever, if it gets interactive like that, cool.
Sounds
If,
good.
if it's only our family that listens to this, whatever, they can be a part of it too. So, but anyway, we did it. Episode 1, we're done. It
Yeah, we
happened.
did it. That was
All right.
fun.
All right. Herodotus. Her-
Herodotus.
Herodotus. All right. We're out.